Produced by Walt Disney Pictures on Pixar Animation Studios in 2004 was that of The Incredibles. The premise of the film had it that on the day of his wedding to Helen Trow, alias of Elastigirl, Bob Paul in his alias of Mr. Incredible saves a civilian from committing suicide, but through circumstances depicted in the film, an obsessed friend of his, Buddy Pine, actually pretends to be a psychic. Incredibly, all Buddy does is put himself as well as others on risk for potential danger. Mr. Incredible is able to save the day, and later gets married to Helen, but tragically as a result of what had happened with the civilian who had attempted suicide as well as others with Buddy collectively sued Mr. Incredible for collateral damage as well as pain and suffering. As a result of the scandal against Mr. Incredible, other scandals are revealed and initiated against the entire super community as a whole. It gets so dire that public opinion turns against the men and women who protected them. The United States government initiates the Superhero Relocation Program, forcing superpowered beings to abandon their identities and quietly return to civilian life. Nearly 20 years later, Bob and Helen have a normal family. Although he loves his family, Bob has missed being a hero all of those years, while Helen resigned herself to being that of a mother and wife. Through details, Bob is recruited by a mysterious organization. The leader of this organization is none other than Buddy, now taking the alias of Syndrome. Bob and Helen reassume their aliases and help to defeat Syndrome, and as a result of what the Incredibles have done, the civilian population of the United States starts to allow superpowered beings back into public life once more. Details had it that when the Superhero Relocation Program started, there was an extraordinary amount of resistance from heroes and heroines due to the fact that without supers, innocent people would be put into needless danger and potentially die. Detractors argue that without these superpowered beings, there was no one to help save them, and that they were actually willing to deal with that reality. As it was mentioned, most supers had retired or simply stopped their heroics, but a good amount of these superpowered beings actually worked for the United States government or even special interests in secret, particularly powerful or skilled heroes and heroines. Simon James Palladino, known as Gazerbeam, was one of these heroes. Simon was actually good friends with Mr. Incredible, Frozone, and Gamma Jack. Simon's alias of Gazerbeam was actually Mr. Incredible's idea. Simon originally desired for his superheroing alias to be that of Viewpoint, but Mr. Incredible thought it to be a terrible codename for his superheroing. Simon even had details with the father of Winston and Evelyn, which further alluded to the importance of Gazerbeam as a hero. But ironically, as per comments by Mr. Incredible, Gazerbeam wasn't a person that could be befriended or even understood easily. He struggled with interpersonal relationships and was often worried about accidentally shooting someone with his laser-beamed eyes if he were to focus on them for too long while in their presence. But more importantly, Simon was a hero like Bob, who wasn't satisfied with life as a civilian and continued to perform heroics in secret or super-related work, even to the extent that in his alter alias, he was an advocate for superpowered beings' rights in the United States after the relocation program went into effect. But through circumstances, he was found by Mirage and later recruited into fighting the Omnidroid robots. Owing to his impressive skill as a superhero, he destroyed the fourth version of the robot before later dying against the fifth version. Online speculations had it that Simon was so heroic that Syndrome probably either held him captive to be released to fight the fifth version, or convinced him to stay at his island headquarters to fight the later upgraded version of the droid, at which the improved version was sufficiently strong enough to overcome Simon and eventually kill him. There were even speculations as to how Simon died, as due to the positioning of the corpse, he might have been mortally injured or attempted to flee and hide from the droid long enough to recover somewhat and potentially escape. Simon might have sat in the underground cavern and possibly waited out a search by the droid, but eventually knew that he was too injured and decided to use his beams to carve the passcode into the cave walls for anyone else who might have come across his corpse. Mr. Incredible mentioned multiple times Syndrome did typical villain actions and never bothered to confirm that Gazerbeam was actually dead, instead relying on minor surveying drones to confirm kills. All Syndrome's drones scanned Gazerbeam's corpse and read it to him as Mr. Incredible being dead. It was also theorized that Gazerbeam was the one who, through now unknown circumstances, found out about the plot that Syndrome was scheming against the other supers, and was the only one to leave a record behind as to someone other than Mr. Incredible to find out about the Cronus program. Due to the situation with Mr. Incredible in Syndrome's island headquarters, he might not been able to have found out about the plot so easily if it weren't for him coming upon Gazerbeam's remains and finding out the clue. Simon was so important but not mentioned much from a casual watcher of The Incredibles' point of view, with the film that Gazerbeam was actually depicted in other Disney or Pixar related media. So as a result, only more in-depth fans of The Incredibles could have possibly known about the other details of Gazerbeam. These examples just showed how important he was to The Incredibles based lore. Sometimes a character can be forgotten because lore mentioned that a character had minor importance, but in-depth further details mention just how important they were.